John 6:35. Dixit autem eis Iesus, ego sum panis vitae, qui veniet ad me non esuriet, et qui credit in me non sitiet umquam. But Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes or will come to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will not thirst ever. Here Jesus is correcting some of the misconceptions of the crowd about him that have been running like a red thread through the last few interactions and exchanges between the crowd and Jesus. And here we get to the heart of the matter, at least we begin to get to the heart of the matter, and we've got a typical formula of speech here. Dixit eis, as we've seen it so many times, with the dative plural of the people, in this case, the multiple people spoken to. He said to them, autem, perhaps adversative here, perhaps just continuing on the story. Moreover, then this is what happened. But I think you could make a case for an adversative sense here because he is sort of correcting or rebuking some mistaken ideas in what he says here. That's a contextual judgment. Jesus, our subject, of course. And then here is the actual quotation, ego sum panis vitae. Probably want to add in a pause there in terms of our punctuation. Again, the Romans didn't use punctuation like this. This is just something we're adding in for the sake of clarity in English. And the quotation ends here. Ego sum, you may remember from your first bit of learning about pronouns that generally we don't need to express pronouns in Latin. So when we do find them, they're almost always emphatic or for the purpose of erasing or reducing ambiguity. So in this case, we've got a major emphasis. I am the bread of life, and not someone else, not another. He could, of course, simply have said, as far as correct Latin usage is concerned, sum panis vitae. He didn't need to say ego sum. But in addition to emphasis in the Latin translation here, we also need to think about the Greek that lies behind this. And you may know this from your Greek studies. We've got ego eimi. And this is a very loaded phrase in Israel's history and in the history of God's revelation of himself to Israel. So you've got to go back to Exodus 3:14. Look at that text, and you'll see where ego eimi is coming from, which of course is also emphatic in Greek. And so not surprisingly, we have our Latin translator mirroring that phrase exactly because it's so important and it's carrying so much freight. It's got to look exactly like that to carry across the same sense and to match up what we find in Exodus 3:14. So Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Panis here is nominative, masculine, singular, and it is an I stem noun. It's a good time to review how I stems are declined. If you feel a little bit fuzzy about that, got a simple genitive here, vitae. Qui veniet ad me non esuriet. So there's a few interesting things going on here. One is, you got to notice these extra little vowels in here. What do these tell us? Do you know? They indicate future tenses, okay? And one of the things about future tense in Latin, in the third and fourth conjugations, as we mentioned before, is that you don't get some helpful infix like the b that we find, bi, that is, in future tenses in the first and second conjugations, to make it really clear to us that a future tense is being employed. Here, communication relies on you noticing that you've got this extra vowel in here, so you've got to be observant and train yourself to notice it. What would this word be if it were present tense instead? Venit. So you can see there, by thinking of the present tense, perhaps, and comparing it to what you see, you can sort of smoke these out. Now, in this first case, what we have in Greek is actually a participle, not a finite verb. So our Latin translator is employing a relative clause as an equivalent to that underlying Greek construction. And what he says is, he who literally will come to me. Now in English, if we were translating this, again, translations shouldn't be the end-all and be-all of what we're doing here. We want to try and think in Latin and apprehend the meaning of the Latin immediately without using the English middleman any more than we have to. But if we are going to use the English middleman, we can say, in English, it's sufficient simply to say, he who comes to me, because that present tense in English can sometimes do double duty and cover a future idea as well. But Latin, as we've said before, is more precise in its sharp distinctions between different senses and their appropriateness than English is. So here we have, he who will come to me will not hunger. And this, like venio, venire, is a fourth conjugation verb. In this case, esurio, esurire. And in fact, our third one is also a fourth conjugation verb, sitio, sitire. So this is the passage for fourth conjugation verbs. If you feel a little bit shaky about how to conjugate fourth conjugation verbs, do what we call a verb synopsis. Choose one of them, let's say esurire, and write out every form in one big, massive summary of the verb. That's a good way to review. You can also, of course, refer to your grammar of choice to do that. So let's move on. So he who will come to me will not hunger, and he who believes, we shift back into the present tense now, he who believes in me will not thirst, and then we're back in the future tense, ever. And it's easy to remember umquam because it is the opposite of numquam, which means never. These are opposites.